Those with actual commercial interests, food producers and buyers, use this market to bet against price increases and decreases as a form of insurance against volatility. So it's not just speculating, it's a casino economy. It's betting on bets and the outcome of bets. Where we used to see something like 12% of the market made up of financial players, today, since deregulation, this number has now jumped to over 60% as a result of when the sections of the Glass-Steagall Act were replaced by President Clinton, Bill Clinton, and signed the Commodity Futures Modernization. The German NGO Foodwatch points out that investment in food commodities has jumped from 65 billion to 126 billion in the past 5 years. Perhaps a more revealing statistic is that speculative investment in these commodities in 2011 amounted to 20 times more than the total spent on agricultural aid by all countries combined. George Monbiot recently described how the Gates Foundation, in its attempts to solve world hunger, is instead facilitating a global food monopoly and a new corporate-driven colonization of the global south, in conjunction with its, quote, hunger-fighting partner, corporations like Monsanto. The Gates Foundation also happens to hold 500,000 shares in Monsanto. Much of the EU's focus on private sector is through its membership of the G8's new Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition, which is predominantly funded by the EU, the US, and several European countries. This year, this 3-year-old public-private partnership will invest 7.57 billion euros in African partner countries in a so-called win-win agricultural development and food security that will lift 50 million people apparently out of hunger by 2022. Noble aspirations, but several examples across Africa have shown that the new alliance is having precisely the opposite effect. In Nigeria, in Mozambique, and in Tanzania, smallholders farmers are being moved off their land to make way for sugarcane, rice, and other crops growing projects which are being backed by the new alliance money. And in Tanzania, at least, none has been offered the choice of whether to be resettled or not. They have only been offered a choice of whether to receive cash or land for resettlement. This violates the internationally recognized principle of prior, free, informed consent and constitutes essentially a land grab. Farmers here are also expected to buy into a risky outgrower scheme which requires them to take out approximately 15,000 euro in loans. The minimum yearly farming wage here is about nearly 500 euros per year, meaning these loans represent a commitment of 30 times their annual salary. To give you an idea, the company involved, Swedish-owned Eco Energy, estimates it will take 7 years to pay back. In Sweden, this would be equivalent to a farmer taking out a loan for $2.5 billion. Ruthless searches for profits by capital is the primary cause of climate change. Climate change is not caused by humans, let's be clear. It's caused by hyenas. There is mounting evidence that climate change will significantly affect agricultural production. Indeed, climate change is already threatening the ability of entire regions, particularly those with rain-fed agriculture, to maintain former levels of agricultural production. According to the UN Development Programme, by 2080, the number of additional people at risk of hunger could reach 600 million as a direct result of climate change. one of the things I think that is often ignored is that one of the primary contributors to climate change is in fact industrial production, industrial agriculture. That leads to huge amounts of green gas emissions, and which is why the UN report has shown that in fact the only safe way of increasing agricultural production is to go for a food sovereignty approach. That is to say, to support African food farming systems. We now understand that increasing the production of food and eradicating hunger and malnutrition are actually two very different objectives. One is commodity production, that is, the production for profit and speculation. The other is resolved by production for need. Sorry to be throwing so many statistics at you, but as Eduardo Galeano once put it, never has the world been so unequal in the opportunities it offers, and so equalizing in the habits it imposes. In this end-of-century world, whoever does not die of hunger dies of boredom. So what has happened? What's brought about this situation? I don't have time to go into great detail, but I want to put some ideas out here. First of all, was the error that all of us made at independence. We all thought that just all we needed to do was to occupy the colonial state, that would deliver all that was needed. What we forgot was the colonial state was itself designed and developed to serve the interests of capital in the peripheries. It was there to protect colonial exploitation. It was there to promote, defend the interests of capital. What did we do? At independence, we occupied the colonial state, and we dressed up our army, our police force, in the colors of our national flag. The only real reform we made was a slight de-racialization of the state. But beyond that, the fundamental structures of the state and their purposes remained that. So we were left with a colonial, capitalist state which we expected to be able to deliver. Nyerere himself made the same error. And many paid the price in your home country, in Zanzibar, with the crushing of the revolution before the Arusha Declaration. The next error, I think, next thing we took on was the effect of what happened in the 1970s, and that was the delinking of the dollar from the gold standard. What effectively this did was to make the dollar the currency of international. And it was not set by any objective standard. It was done as a political decision. And the price of the dollar, the exchange rate of the dollar against all other currencies, is done on the basis of speculation, not by any true value. So what that resulted was a massive, massive devaluation of most of the currencies of the third world, which meant that because we still had to pay our debts in dollars, we will now have to transfer even greater proportions of our national product to meet that. These last 30, 40 years have seen a massive reversal of the gains of independence. Let me be clear, some things we tend to forget is that even though we may have had regimes which were far from progressive, even though we may have had, we may have occupied the colonial state, there were some really dramatic increases in the quality of life of most Africans. Where there was no education, there was universal education. Where there was no healthcare, there was universal healthcare. Where there was no water access, there was major investments in water. There was major investment in communications, in telecommunications, etc. Indeed, a UN wider report, which was edited by the late Surendra Patel, demonstrated that in that period between 1950 and 1990, there were huge, huge increases in life expectancy at birth, in improvements in infant mortality, maternal mortality, and so on. There was even an increase in industrial production. All of that has been reversed. There has been a systematic, since the 1980s, with the introduction of the structural adjustment programs, the rise of neoliberalism, there has been dispossessions of land. There have been dispossessions of the value of the wage. There have been dispossessions of the quality of life. There have been dispossessions of the quality of healthcare. All of the public domains which were developed in the post-independence period have been privatized. Those which weren't profitable to privatize, they were effectively privatized by the NGOs. The rural development, rural schools, rural healthcare was passed on to them. The effect was that whereas before we could claim our healthcare, our education and so on as our right for something that we shed blood during the struggle for independence, today we have to beg for it from the NGOs. So there's been a massive dispossession, privatization, deindustrialization, land grabbing, imprisonment of small farmers by the agro-industrial complex, to the control of access to seeds, pesticides, fertilizers, and so on. There's even been the development by Monsanto of what's called terminator seeds. They only last 1 year, and then they die, and you have to buy them out again. There's been a massive killing of African farming systems, and a growing gap between rich and poor. There's another political dispossession. There are two other political dispossessions which I think we don't have enough reflection upon. The first is that our governments today are more accountable to the corporations, the transnational corporations, to the banks, to the international financial institutions, than they are to the citizens who elected them. And I would venture that that holds as true in the United States of America as it does in Nairobi, in Kenya, or any other of the underdeveloped countries. The second dispossession around which there has been inadequate attention paid, and why what